Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, brought to you by spiritualteachers.org. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. Hello, and thanks for joining me for this episode of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I've got a quick announcement before we get started. November 1st through the 3rd is TAP Foundation's November event, and both Bob Sergel and Arnima Pundir, who've been guests on this podcast, will be there, along with Art Tickner. This event will feature breakout sessions in small groups with each teacher. And if you're used to events with 150 people in the room and only a handful of those get the opportunity to ask questions, this format will be a nice change of pace for you. Wherever you are, it's definitely an event worth attending. To find out more, visit tapfoundation.org and look for the November event banner. Now, my guest this episode is Mori Lee. Mori is one of those otherwise quiet souls who became obsessed with finding the truth. I hope you enjoy and find inspiration in his story. Well, first thing I wanted to do, Maury, is just thank you, obviously, for taking the time out of your day to spend some time on an interview.
I'm glad to do it. A little new for me because, like I said, I've been a hermit for years and years and years. So,
yeah, understood. Well, I'll start off with what I'm sure will be an easy question to start this interview off with, and that is on your blog. It says, there's a description, I guess. It says, 69-year-old male expressing non-duality, realization by the grace of God. Can you elaborate a little more on what you mean and why you chose that phrase, the grace of God?
Well, basically it comes down to, if you start doing the inquiry of, who am I, and you do it seriously, pretty soon you sort of drop the who am I, and you start realizing that you're not even a who, so to speak, as a person, that you are this principle, the Vedanta, Tatswa. I mean that you are that, and you get to the point where you are that, but you can't say much else about it. And so, I'm not somebody. I know some people say, "Oh, there's nobody here, and there's no person left." When you realize, what you really are, but. I don't take that stance, but the personality that you always thought that you were shifts into the background. It's like the Gestalt, the shift between foreground and background. There's just a shift, and all of a sudden it's like you're observing your person from another point, a point of awareness that doesn't have any judgment or anything to say about it. It allows everything, but you're looking at yourself from there. So, in fact, I was talked a lot with Charlie Hayes, and a race car driver that became a teacher. And I'm talking to him. He says, "Well, you write really well. You should start a blog." And he said, "You should name it No More." So, and I tend to be someone that reacts rather than goes out and promotes. So if somebody asks me a question, I'll talk. Or if somebody says, you write well, start a blog, here's a name for you. It's like I respond that way versus, someone that's a missionary type and is going to go out and save the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's not me. So does that explain what I wrote there, or do you think I covered it?
Well, I'm curious two things. So I know your blog has been around for quite a while, since 2007. So it was this the suggestion from Charlie that was the impetus to start it?
Yeah, and my blog is not popular, and basically non-duality isn't really popular. I mean, when you start pursuing it, you find out there's a lot of people out there, but in general, it's not. But I've had a number of people come talk to me, like Jeffrey Martin. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's doing brainwave scanning and all that with mystics and people that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he dropped by my house one day and interviewed me for a few hours, you know, for his program. And then, I mean, he interviewed lots of people and then selected a number of them. I mean, that's all I've done is, you know, I mean, years ago I wrote a book, but I've never promoted that either. So,
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I've been just a very quiet householder type that just pursued this and came to the end of my seeking, and it satisfied me. And
so you mentioned I believe you used the word a switch into a different perspective. At the same time, I noticed on your blog that you also talk a fair bit about understanding versus belief, and I got the impression that you felt that understanding non-duality was important, but are you talking about an intellectual understanding, as in terms of reading books and sort of grasping in that way, or are you talking about more of an experiential understanding, or both?
you need both. You need both. From the time I was really, really little, I was really, really intuitive. I mean, really intuitive. And I was raised by Baptist missionaries to a large extent in the Belgian Congo. But then my father also went and became the director of the Baptist churches in Belgium. And so I graduated from high school in Belgium. But so what I noticed in myself is that over time I would go through shifts. I would go through 6 months or a year where I was like very anti-intellectual and would just pursue the nonlinear side of my existence, or the feeling side, or the intuitive side, and would have incredible mystical experiences and kundalini stuff that was sometimes very ecstatic and very blissful. And during those times I would get like a download, is the only way I would describe it. And it's a download that's beyond words, but when you get into that space, you would get the sense that you knew everything, or you knew this tremendous amount of stuff that was absolutely full of meaning, just tremendous meaning and bliss, and everything was okay, and everything was in order. And sometimes I would stay for a few hours or a few weeks or a month, and then that would drop. And then contrast that with, I'm also extremely intellectual, and I love abstract thinking. And so after those periods, then I would say, okay, that's an experience. What is the message? What do I need to understand now that ecstasy or that whatever experience is over? And very often there would be almost like a depression afterwards, because the intensity of the download would be, what do you call it? It would be very, so meaningful that when it left, and I'm back in my sort of regular, ordinary, mundane state, I would not know how to deal with it other than try and understand it. So then I would read. But then I can also say that when I would be reading like Franklin Merrell-Wolff or Krishnamurti, I would literally get mystical experiences from that. So I think it would be pretty hard for me to say that one is over the other. But at the same time, at some point, I had to come to my mind, I would say, needed to have a grasp of what I had experienced, say, I don't want to just say it's emotional, but whatever that other side is. So I mean, you can have an experience, but, somehow you have to be able to communicate it, and my mind would want to understand it. And so I don't think it's enough to have an experience. And as I think you're pointing out, that just an intellectual understanding of, oh yeah, that's the case. In other words, if you get it intellectually and you don't do anything with it, I think the term now people use as embodiment. It's like, in other words, the realization has to be so profound that the way you live your life has changed. And if you just understand it intellectually and say, oh yeah, that's interesting. It's like, oh, I understand the theory of, light, or EMC squared equals whatever. So you understand that. If it doesn't, when it comes to realization, you have to embody it. And I think, so you realize you are that. Well, that's just the first step, It's from then on, it's like, how well do you embody it? How well do you change your life or see things differently and act on that truth versus what the normal clutch and grab thing is.
Did you have the experience of the intellectual part of yourself wanting to pick apart these mystical experiences and discount them or explain them away?
No. They are, what can I say? The first time I had a really incredible mystical experience, afterwards, my feeling and my thinking was that there is absolutely no way that you could intellectually prove this or even question it. In other words, they come with so much authority that to even think of intellectually questioning it is ridiculous. The authority of them is like what my daughter used to like me to rub her back when she went to sleep at night. And this was years ago because she's grown and she's got her own kids and everything. But I would rub her back at night. But like I said, my search was intense. So I would have a cassette tape of, say, Krishnamurti playing in the bedroom, and I would be listening to that and rubbing my daughter's back. So I'm rubbing her back and I'm feeling all this love for my daughter and listening to Krishnamurti, and then boom, I'm in this other space. And I'm talking about ecstasy. I mean, it's just absolute pure bliss. And then suddenly, I can only conjecture, but it was like my personal self or whatever sort of realized that, oh my God, you're not here. It was like this other space. And I'm like, I'm not here. And then the next thought was, I can't stay here because I'm not here. And I have 2 kids and I have to take care of them. And if I stayed here, I wouldn't do anything. I'd just be blissed out, gone forever. And so it started to fade. But as it faded, I got this, I don't hear a voice, but it's just you just get a knowledge, or you get the words, but they're not auditory for me. But the word was that you are totally surrounded by absolute beauty, and you always have been, and you always will be, whether you realize it or not. Where does shit like that come from? I mean, it was like a message that this ecstasy left, but the message was, you are surrounded by absolute beauty, always have been and always will be, whether you realize it or not. And there were other times when, like for a month or so, everything was so beautiful to me that I would watch TV and cry because of all the beautiful faces. I remember being in a fish store and looking at the fish, and I mean, everything was so beautiful. It was like, just cry. But eventually that leaves, and then you have to deal with sort of a more ordinary life, but with this knowledge that there's something else behind all of this that's, beyond.
So when the period of time when those sorts of experiences were happening for you, you were still actively searching though, right?
Oh yes.
It wasn't like you.
Oh yes.
So what kept you moving or questioning or reading? If you're having these sorts of experiences, why didn't you just say, "Oh, well, that's awesome. That's satisfying to me. I can live with that, knowing that." Because,
as you said, the intellectual part of me or whatever wanted to understand. There's just two sides of me that are very strong, and that intuitive side was open enough to allow me to have all these experiences. But the intellectual side of me wanted to come to a satisfactory understanding, and basically, I always saw my life as being cursed. And the reason I thought it was cursed was because from the time I was really, really little, I had this intense drive to know the truth. And it's like, I would talk to other kids and other people, and I never met anybody that had that sense of urgency about there's some truth that's missing, and everybody's living their lives and they don't know this truth. And while everybody else could, go out to the bars and drink or play sports and all of that seemed to be enough for them, I always felt like I was cursed because I had to question everything, because there was this sense that something was missing. There was a truth that absolutely needed to be known, or none of this made sense or was worthwhile. And that just drove me, and I didn't feel in charge of it. I never had a sense of me personally choosing to be on this quest, ever. It was just, I was born, and the quest was there. There was no getting around it. There was no pushing it in the background. It just was this intense thing about there's something that nobody sees, nobody knows about, nobody's paying attention to. But for some reason, I knew that it was missing and I needed to find it. And it wasn't, I never felt like a choice. It was never a choice.
Did you ever turn away from that and try to hide from that quest?
No, but the quest was very serious in the fact that, I was raised like I said, in Africa for a number of years, with basically religious fanatics. And, so I pretty much had to toe the line, at least, you know, present that I went along with the program to a certain extent. But when I got to college out in California in the late 60s, and the drug culture out there, I just lost it like that. I mean, it just, in 1 or 2 weeks, the whole thing just collapsed because I was looking for the truth and I couldn't believe it. And so for a number of years, I mean, I was just in sheer 24/7 psychological pain trying to figure out what would replace that, you know, what the real truth was. And then I went through a lot of years of being angry, and then I was an atheist for a number of years. But even during the time of being a complete atheist, that search was still there. It was just, if I had to be an atheist to get to the truth, if I had to be an agnostic, whatever, I couldn't stop it.
I didn't quite follow you. So you came out to California, and what was it that changed about you or dropped away when you came to California?
Well, just trying to believe the Western interpretation, or the basic interpretation of Christianity that I was brought up with. I just didn't believe it. And as soon as I left home and went out to California and was away from all my relatives and anybody that would tell me how I should think or how I should feel and what I should believe, everything just collapsed. It's just gone. I say, okay, I got to start from scratch. So starting from scratch as well, there's this body here, and the God that I was taught to believe in didn't seem real to me in any way whatsoever. And so it was being in at that time I really liked the existentialists, because they talked about this oblivion and this loneliness and having no answers and being alienated. And so basically at that time I would say I was, you know, just pretty much an existentialist.
Did you get involved like some people did, using things like LSD to explore spiritual?
No. I had friends, you know, acquaintances that were into anything they could get. But the truth was, I was so intense and questioned everything and was so on edge with my search that even the people that would take LSD and stuff, they wouldn't give it to me. They were like, "No, we don't even want to be around you if you take that stuff." They were like, "You're really already way too far out." I'm serious. They if they were going to go do it, they'd say, "We don't want to be responsible for that when we took this."
So you were attracted to the existentialists. I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of what your search looked like in those years. Was it primarily reading, or did you go to discussion groups, or?
No, reading. I mean, I read everything. I mean, I plowed through, you know, the poetry of the romantic poets and stuff. I read just a lot of self-help books, you know, anything I could get on. So basically, I first plowed through all the self-help books, and then really got into psychology and studied all the different kinds of psychology. And then I studied philosophy, you know, not formally, but, you know, all kinds of philosophy. And then eventually it came to the point, well, none of that has the answer. So the only thing left was spirituality. And so then I started reading. Here's what I noticed. I would go to the bookstore and I would find a book that was just a little bit off of wherever my current beliefs or understanding or whatever was, and I would buy it. And it was like Ramana talks about, you take a thorn to remove a thorn. So basically with thinking, it's like if I was in position A, I would buy a book that would sort of accept that, but was a little had a little different take or a little expansion. So I would read that book, and I would drop the previous position and take on the new one. And so, and I could look at myself and see what I was doing. So at some point I said, I keep reading books that will destroy my current position. And then when I take up this new position, I'll get another book that will take that apart. So I saw there's this whole deconstruction going on. It's like I'm using deeper and deeper concepts to destroy where I've gone before. And at some point during that time, I picked up Krishnamurti. And I went home, and again, I had a wife and 2 kids. I had no idea who Krishnamurti was, never heard of him. But I bought this book called You Are the World. And I started reading it. And halfway through it, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to start crying because I felt this incredible forgiveness. So I went to the other side of the house and went in the bathroom and closed the door and sat on the floor and continued to read. And then I just started crying and crying and crying. I just felt this tremendous forgiveness. And I couldn't even tell why. But Krishnamurti just literally took my head apart. He just destroyed it. And then I read everything he wrote after that. I mean, I bought every book I could find, ordered books from India that weren't even in print in the U.S., and read them. And what I was always trying to do was I was saying, I like the space he's coming from. So when I was reading him, I was trying to feel my way into the space he had to be in to write what he wrote. It's like, where is he? What is the space he is in that he can write this? And he was really good, because then after that I would go to work and I would look at people and I would say, okay, take the position that you have no idea what a person is and start from scratch. It's something that moves. It's something that talks. And so it's basically reconstructing from not knowing anything, having no objective idea of who a person was or what a thing was. And it was really Krishnamurti that sort of started all these mystical experiences.
About how old were you at that time?
Late 20s.
Now, you've described yourself as a hermit, yet you went to college, you got married, you had kids, you had a career, right? So it's not like you were in the woods.
So, right. So let me correct that. What I meant was that I didn't socialize any more than I had to. In other words, every minute I had, like I would stay up all night reading. You know, I'd go to work, take care of my kids, and stay up, till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, or get up in the middle of the night and read Krishnamurti or Richard Rose or, whoever I was finding helpful or would help clarify or give me another, experience that opened me up to those levels. So, not a hermit in the woods, no, but a hermit in the sense that I didn't go to parties, I didn't join groups, I didn't, I just had this pursuit.
So what did your wife think about this? Did she just think you had an odd hobby, or?
Well, my wife at that time, eventually, she would be, if we were, going to go somewhere like a parent-teachers meeting or something like that, she came to the point where, she would say, don't talk about Nietzsche or Krishnamurti. Because everything I was talking about and reading about was not, people would just think it was very odd. So
right.
It was an issue.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Did she know going into the relationship when you first met her? Like, did she know what you were really passionate about, or did she share that at all?
I think she was really a rebel at heart,
Hmm.
but she would, and so she could vicariously experience someone really being a rebel without having to do it herself. And I got to give her credit. I think she really was, but she just couldn't do it, and she didn't have that curse of the pursuit, that just had to be done. And I mean, we end up divorced because the relationship didn't seem honest to me anymore. So,
Mm-hmm.
but this kind of pursuit I don't think is healthy for relationships, because it's such a priority that people can feel left out or ignored.
That's a very interesting point to me, because I know that one thing that working with Richard Rose, he emphasized to us is that, well, he once said, you can't carry your girlfriend on your back through the gates of heaven.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
yeah, well, I was just going to say, I get that, yet at the same time, that I think that's a very difficult message, and a lot of people disagree with it because they feel like you should be able to have a relationship and be successful in your work, and because there should be balance to all these things. And then if you get too far into the spiritual search, it's like you're hiding from life. You get those sorts of accusations. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I would sort of agree with what those people are saying. If anything, what I would like to promote is the idea of the being a householder and being able to pursue this and getting to the end. Now, I might say that it might take you a lot longer, and in my case, it probably took me a lot longer because I didn't drop everything and go to India to an ashram or anything like that. I lived a pretty normal life, and I could go to work and not talk about this to anybody. And be married and have kids and do that, but literally every spare moment was reading and contemplating. I was never a meditator. Meditation never did a thing for me, but I would contemplate, and I would contemplate just very, very deeply, and it was it was very rewarding, and the other side of it is it kept me grounded. Going to work and having family kept me grounded, so that and that's one of the things that I disagreed with Rose on. I mean, I read as many of this is years ago, but I read, the Albigen papers. How do you pronounce that?
Albigen?
Yeah, I read those, and pretty much read everything I could find that Rose wrote, and I read some of the books that other of the students wrote. I think there's one or two of them, but I disagreed with Rose where you had to drop everything and not have a girlfriend or not be married or whatever. So I would fall on the side that you probably don't have a choice. If you're the type that has to drop everything and be celibate and go off to India or go in the woods and live by yourself, I don't think people have a choice over that. That's the way they're structured. They're going to do that, But there's quite a few people that have been householders and come to realize that they are that. So either way, I mean, this whole thing is infinite, so there's going to be infinite ways to realize the self, whether you remain a householder or you join an ashram, or, you know, it happens all kinds of different ways. And that's one of the things I like about TAT, is that from what I gather, people can come there and talk, and there's no, I don't see any really rigid like belief system that you have to have discovered this, say, by reading Richard Rose or by following this methodology. I think from what I've seen, you guys have people that talk that have come about this discovery in lots of different ways. And there's other organizations that know you have to have come to this via this method.
It is unique in that way. There's a great variety of teachers available. And at the same time, while that's a strength, I also think occasionally that that's a bit of a weakness, because people do, if you have a clear-cut path or a teacher or a teaching, and you say, well, this is the way that it's done, this is what you do, there's a certain attraction to that.
Absolutely. I agree. But then there's people like me that the ministers that I was around, they would get up in the pulpit and they would preach as if they knew, right? I know this is the way it is. And it wasn't believable to me. And so I didn't end up disrespecting all authority, but I came up with a real skepticism of, some people in authority know what they're talking about, and a lot of them don't. And so I didn't like structured, organized religion of any kind, and I didn't join any because I always felt like as soon as I got into a structure, you get into bureaucracy, and there's going to be some limits on what you can explore. Or there'll be somebody saying, no, that's not the way you do this. And I was all for freedom. And I was like, I don't care what the method is. I don't care, what the structure is. If at any time I say, no, my road goes this way, I think it's over here, I wasn't going to abide by any structure whatsoever. I mean, it was very, so it's like I would read anyone and everyone, and either it resonated and rang true or it didn't. But the only group I ever was in and stayed in for a long time was a Gestalt group that ran in Kansas City for years, and it was very, very intense. I mean, it was dream work and just very, very intense. And Gestalt work is not analytical; it's very experiential. And so I worked on my dreams a lot, and that will bring up. If you've got a lot of repressed stuff, doing dream work will get it out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned primal therapy and Gestalt therapy, both on your blog. And Michael Casari had actually briefly mentioned primal therapy when I interviewed him. So that was, obviously, since you mentioned both of those, you felt like they were an important part of your path?
I would say they're absolutely critical. The guy I went to did not have a license to practice psychology or anything anyway. He'd been, I think, Presbyterian minister for a number of years, but he was very, very radical, and basically the church kicked him out. and he became very depressed. And so he got into therapy, and he got into Gestalt therapy, and then he learned that, and he just started his own group. And he was a completely wild man, and he was willing to let anybody that came to him totally risk the dissolution and complete disruption of their personality and their whole life to get to the truth of who they were. And I love that about him. And the first time I went to one of his groups, and, we would sort of have to say where we were that day to become present. And so I did my little opening thing. And the first thing that he ever said to me is, he said, "There's nothing wrong with you that killing 100 people wouldn't cure." And I absolutely loved it, because right from the get-go, he could see how angry I was. And I thought, my God, this guy is perceptive. Now, the other side, and this ties into, you were saying, intellectual versus experience. I was so against analysis or having anybody analyze me and label me that I specifically chose to go into Gestalt work, because it wasn't analytical, because it was experiential. And what I wanted was to get at the pain and all the repressed stuff that I was carrying. And so all the initial work I did, I didn't even want to come and even try and present something I wanted to work on, because that was like a personal choice or an intellectual choice. So I thought, well, my dreams are coming out of my unconscious, and I'm not consciously controlling those. So if I work on my dreams, I'm dealing with whatever is down there. So I would literally, when I dreamt, I would record my dreams, and I would go over them just before I went to group. And I would literally work on my dreams. And the symbols carry all kinds of projections and repressed stuff. And it got very intense. And then, so I was doing that. And during that time, I happened across the book, The Primal Scream. So I'm reading it over the weekend. And my God, the first third of the book, I'm like, my God, if this guy's right, I'm in big doo-doo, because if just the normal average person has a lot of repressed pain, the childhood I had, my God, I've probably got a ton. And the next third of the book, I was like, oh my God, I think this might be true. And then by the end of the book, I was like, this is absolutely true. I've got to feel this pain, because there's no way around it. So I went to group that week, and I was laying on the floor in front of a couch, and there was like a dozen other people there. And we're going around the room, and he came to me, and he said, "Maury?" And I just said, "Leave me alone." And then I started wailing, and there weren't tears, but my stomach was rolling from the bottom of my stomach all the way up and out my mouth, and I was wailing. And I was in front of this group, and I wailed for 45 minutes. Just a solid 45 minutes of just wailing with my gut rolling. And I recall the therapist in the middle of it, he said, "That's the pain the human race is afraid to feel." And the pain was that when I was a child, because I had to toe the line, and all these Christian fanatics had how you should think and how you should feel. So I was never left alone to feel my own feelings and think my own thoughts without somebody trying to stop it or repress it or tell me they were wrong. And that was a very, very deep, call it a primal pain. And because that was a safe group and any emotion was allowed, it just came out. And after that, anytime I smelled something or saw something that reminded me of something in my childhood that was painful, I would start getting this huge pressure at the back of my head and the top of my neck. And I knew I had to get home because something was coming out. And so I'd go home to my apartment and lay down and cry or scream or yell or whatever and just feel that pain. So that's the experiential side. But through all that, there was another side that wanted to understand. So that's why I mentioned a lot about understanding. But actually, then the understanding becomes very simple: is that you are that. So that's what stopped the search, is when that understanding was clear.
I'm assuming that you had some sort of intuitive sense that the Gestalt therapy, something drove you to look for that, or you read a book that resonated with you.
Oh yeah, it's like I said, I did all the self-help stuff, and when I came across Fritz and Gestalt therapy, I decided, in my late 20s, that I was messed up. I was absolutely certain that there was something wrong with me, that I was messed up, and that I needed to clean that up. And so I said, what kind of psychology do you want? I didn't want to be analyzed. Because analysis can go on for years, and like you were pointing out, it's very intellectual. And I was like, I'm not going to go to somebody to give me, a label or several labels and try and analyze it. So I read Fritz Perls, and I was like, okay, this is totally experiential. I was fascinated with it, and it wasn't analytical. So I said, okay, I can go to Gestalt group. So then I went and I looked for a Gestalt therapist. And I found this guy, and he was perfect for me. But even then, I wanted to be absolutely certain that I was just dealing with my own unconscious stuff, not anything that I could analyze or figure out, but just what was really there. So that's why I went to Gestalt. I picked Gestalt because it wasn't analytical.
How long did you do that?
On and off for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And I know, at least I have the feeling that a lot of people hope or suspect or act as if they just stick to the non-dual writings, if they just stick with reading Ramana Maharshi and meditating and Nisargadatta, that you don't really have to deal with that stuff.
That's bullshit. I think that's bullshit. Because if you study Advaita Vedanta, what's the whole purpose of meditation? It's to quiet the mind. Because they say you're not going to get the realization that you are that if you don't have a quiet, subtle mind. Okay. So, some people can do that through meditation. I was so full of pain that the only way I was going to get cleared up was to feel it. And the work that a Gestalt therapist does is you come and you present your block. Or their purpose is to see where you're blocked, where you're blocking yourself. And then they push on you. Because you can't do it yourself. They push on you to go through the block. And once that block is pushed over, all this crap comes out. And I was full of crap. All kinds of pain and all this. And that's exactly what interferes with having a quiet, subtle mind. If you're sitting on a whole bunch of pain and it's unconscious or repressed, what are you going to do? You're going to project. And if you're projecting, you're not seeing the truth. So I can tell you, I got an extremely quiet mind from that Gestalt work. And then the primal stuff that followed. It just cleaned it out. And after that, my mind was really quiet. It just stopped. The racing mind and all that was gone. And I never needed to meditate to do that. And yet, then, once I had gone through all that, and all that was out of the way, well, then I could read Nisargadatta and go, oh my God, I understand what he's saying. I spent a year in my mid-40s. I took 5 years off and just stayed home. I had one of my kids was with me. And I worked on this old house during one day, and then the next day I would just study Nisargadatta all day. And the next day I'd work on the house, and the next day I'd study Nisargadatta. And I stayed home for 5 years. That's part of my being a hermit right there. I was in the middle of the inner city in a rundown house that was the only thing I had to live in. So I was, totally redoing it and just take my son to school every day and stay home and work on the house or study. So no, I don't think that you need to just read non-dual books and do meditation. That's the only way. I totally disagree with that.
At what point in time, or how old were you as you, well, I don't know how to say it, but got to the end of your search, or the switch flipped? Maybe that's the right words to use.
Well, that's really interesting, because when I look at myself, I see a real paradox. And the paradox was that, okay, I was on this search, but for some reason I had this intuition. I could pick up a book and start reading it. I'd say, okay, this guy's got it, I'm going to read him. Or I'd pick up any other book and go, this guy claims to have it, but he doesn't, right? So why in the hell am I still searching if some part of me already knows who's got it and who doesn't? Now, that's a paradox. I mean, even now it seems really strange to me that, so what that sort of points to is like some part of me knew, but it's like another part didn't know that I knew. It's just very paradoxical. I can look at that and say, how arrogant that you're on this search, but somehow you pick up a book and you say, yeah, this guy's got it and this guy doesn't, so I need to study this one because he's got it. So, I mean, that supports the thing that we all are that, and deep down inside somehow we know it. But personally or intellectually, we don't. And so that's sort of weird. So, and when I look back at some of the stuff I wrote, 20 years ago, it's like, it sure seems like you knew this then, but you just didn't know that you knew it. It's very strange, but it was only, much later that I came to Robert Wolfe. It was really reading his books that finally made my intellectual side feel like, okay, I know, and I know that I know. It's sort of, it reminds me of Ramana Maharshi talked about I. He didn't say I, he always said I. And it sort of reminds me of that it's like some part of you knows, but then another part of you needs to know that you know. And it finally came to the point where, okay, I said, I know, and I know that I know. And that was like the final thing, is that not just that I know, but I know that I know. And it's hard to explain it any better than that, but it just sort of was like, and when I finally realized it and felt that, okay, this search is done, not that I'm done or there's not further progress, but that the search, that driving search was over, was at that point and it wasn't any big experience. It was just, oh, okay, it's over. I know that I know. And it was very quiet, and I went to bed and had a good night's sleep. And I think that the good point here is a lot of people are searching for some particular experience that they're going to have. They don't know what it is, but they think when they have it, that experience will be it, and it will be so strong that they'll know it. They'll be enlightened or whatever. And I don't think it always happens that way.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. I, you and I are different, I think, in the respect that I felt myself to be very intellectual but not very intuitive. So when I would have a mystical type experience, the next hour my brain would be discounting it. Well, that could just be biochemicals, and there's no reason to believe that that is any more real than what you're feeling and seeing right now. So there was always that discounting in me.
I never had that, ever. When I had those experiences, they came with authority. They came with absolute authority. And it was like, when I wasn't in that space after that, I would try to even think about it or say, the felt feeling afterwards was, there's no way I could question this. It doesn't matter if I had, 20 top-notch quantum physicists and and biologists, PhDs, telling me I was nuts and that was an invalid experience. It's like, it wouldn't hold a candle to the authority of the experience. So, everybody's different.
Yeah, that's for sure. And that's really, that's one of the things that I've enjoyed a lot about this podcast, is that opportunity to get to talk to a lot of different types of people and just hear about and share those experiences. I know you've mentioned the therapeutic aspect, for example. Looking back on your path, have you thought much about what are some commonalities or bits of advice that you would share with people?
That's a tough one. But first of all, I would say that the biggest obstacle, and I'm repeating something that Robert Wolfe has said, and it's that the biggest obstacle is it couldn't happen to me. I mean, literally, you read these books, it's like, oh, okay, only 1 in a million could possibly realize that. There's only a few. There's only 5 on the planet or whatever. And so basically, it just becomes a search that somehow unconsciously you think will never end because you'll never get it in this lifetime. And so I think the biggest obstacle is some sense of, oh, well, little old me, I'm just a householder, or I'm just a carpenter, or I'm just a whatever. It can't happen to me. Or I don't have a PhD, and I didn't go to India, and I didn't go, to satsang every week. So, it interests me, but it couldn't happen to me. I think that's the one advice I would say is it can happen to anybody. And it doesn't have to be some big experience that blows your mind and somehow that experience tells you that you got it. It can come in much more subtler and quiet ways. But I don't think people have a choice as far as the intensity of the search. Like for me, I described it as a curse because it didn't feel like I had any control over it. It was like inborn. So I think the intensity of people's search is a determinant, but how you go about it, whether you meditate or you don't meditate, or whether you're more intellectual or you're more a feeling devotional type, it's like you just follow the path that resonates with you. Just follow the path that resonates with you. If it fascinates you, if it excites you, if it feels like there's truth here, just find whatever resonates the deepest with you, and that's your path. And I don't think you have to follow any particular teacher, because a lot of them have it and they express it in different ways. And some resonate with some and don't resonate with others.
Yeah, I've definitely heard follow your fascination as a piece of advice.
Yes. Yeah. If it fascinates you and it's just, I would use words like, if it fascinates you, if it thrills you, if it totally intrigues you, then follow it.
I think, though, there's a good distinction that you at least implied, that there's a depth to that fascination. For example, I might be fascinated by going to the horse races on Sunday mornings, but that's not really there's a difference.
That's not it.
Yeah, there's a depth that we're talking about. That it may not, I think that's, I don't know what you think about this, but I think that sometimes there's some work to be done in that respect, of really digging in to discover what is our deep desire.
And in my case, I'd say I didn't have to think about that.
Yeah.
And that's why I said I don't think someone can just decide, oh, enlightenment would be cool. I think I'm gonna go for that. If it's not intense, if it's not something, a drive that you can't even escape, I don't think the desire is strong enough there that it's gonna bear any fruit. I mean, intensity is a requirement, but again, I think I was intense, but I stayed very grounded and I appeared to live a normal life.
And how does your life manifest these days? Like, what are you keeping yourself busy with?
Well, I spend a lot of time watching videos on Backgap.
Yeah.
And they just absolutely entertain me. And it's like, I'm not searching anymore, but because this is such a profound knowing, it's just absolutely entertaining to me to watch how other people express it, or how they came to this understanding, and like for fun. Like, how many people would say for fun they read the philosophy, what Franklin Merrell's book, The Philosophy of Consciousness Without an Object?
Not many would read that for fun.
and so I just reread it recently because I'd read it in my 20s, and I just wanted to say, well, after all these years, how does that resonate with me now? Well, it just felt wonderful. So I'm retired, and I live way below my means. I don't have any expensive hobbies, and so I just spend my time reading and gardening and taking care of the hummingbirds, and talking to my son when he calls. And when I write my blog, it's like it's mostly reactions. Like, I'll be watching a video, like on Backgap, or listening to a podcast on your site, and I'll say, how do I understand that? How would I write about that? Or I would say it this way. And so the writing is just a reaction. And it's almost as if I don't write it. I mean, it just sort of comes to me, and I'll write it in like 5 minutes and edit it a little bit. But if I feel like I am writing it as a person, then I don't put it out there because it doesn't feel true. But if it just sort of comes to me, or it feels like it was just sort of given to me, then it feels right, and I'll put it on the blog.
Are you open to people contacting you if people listen to this?
Oh, yeah. If they listen to it, they want to contact me, I'd be glad to respond.
Great.
So, and that's the only way I would do it, because, like I said, I don't have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
it's like I just discovered this for myself, and doesn't make life perfect, but it ends the search, and it gives you a tremendous amount of peace. But I've never been one to say, "Oh, I've got this, and everybody needs to know what I know, and so here's my shingle, and this is what y'all need to know." I'm more, if someone asked me something, I would respond. Or like you said, you want to interview? So I'm like, okay, I've never done that before, but I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because I really feel like if I'm supposed to do something, it'll happen. That I don't have to do anything personally, really. I mean, it's not a feeling that I personally have to do something. It's just I respond.
Do you feel like there's been any, in the years since the switch flipped, do you feel like there's been an evolution to that experience or the embodiment of it? What's been your experience of that?
I think that's a start in a way. It's the end of the search, but then starts the how do you live this, or what difference does it make that you know this, and trying to live it. And I don't think that's easy, because, we all have this conditioning, and there's still a person here. It's like, I don't feel like that's who I am, but the person is here, and it's an expression of that. And it's still got habits, things it likes more than others. So the realization to me is just the beginning, and then then how do you relate to people, and how does that, am I living up to what I know or not? And half the time I don't. This idea of enlightenment is some kind of a perfection where you can do no wrong and you're walking around in bliss with your eyes looking all glazed over is not, I don't think that's helpful. I mean, they talk about, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, after that, chop wood, carry water. Or they say, well, it's perfectly ordinary. Well, in a way, that's just absolutely true. It's like you have this different perspective, and you have this background of peace or space, but on the surface, there's still all the crap to deal with. And just because you know it doesn't mean everything just slides into place. And, now I don't plan much, and I have to be careful because I don't try to live in the moment, but I am so in the moment that I have to be really sure that whatever I'm doing, I finish that before I move on to the next thing. Because if I start anything and move on to the next thing, I'm so in the moment with the next thing that if I've left the pot on the stove, I'm going to burn the house down. I mean, it's just that way. I'm just, whatever I'm doing is the only thing I'm doing. I'm never doing one thing and my mind is wandering and thinking about other things. It's like here. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem, because planning or anything like that is just very difficult, because nothing is important except the moment. If I go out and turn on the water to water the yard, I almost have to put it in my phone, an alarm or something, because if I start doing anything else, that's it, I'm there. Everything else is gone. It's really weird. But
yeah, I still don't know. I understand completely the idea of being driven and finding a resolution to that drive, but I still am up in the air in terms of what does that realization or enlightenment, experience the absolute, what does that mean in terms of practical daily life in this world that we're in? Is the whole planet headed towards enlightenment? Are we evolving into more and more spiritual beings? I don't have the slightest idea.
Well, a lot of people seem to be saying that this understanding, or the ease of getting this understanding, is becoming a lot more prevalent. But I don't know. I mean, why did I read all those books? Because the average person that I was around, there was almost nobody I could talk to about this. So the only place I could find what resonated with me was in books like Richard Rose and Nisargadatta, or Ramana Maharshi, or David Hawkins, or, the Bhagavad Gita. So, but now that there is the internet, this stuff is a lot more available. And when you started and I started, it wasn't. So it was a lot harder. I don't have any sense of, I've realized something, and so now I'm going to go save the world. I mean, I really have the sense that, God is in charge, or whatever you want to call that, is in charge, and everything is ultimately okay, whatever happens. But we are people, and we are on this planet, and, me personally, it's like I've worn nothing but clothes from thrift stores for the last 30 years or more. Everything. I buy all my clothes at the thrift store. If I need something, I'll buy it at the thrift store first. Not because I can't afford it. I drive a 20-year-old car, and I could go out tomorrow and buy a new car. But it's like it's better for the planet if I don't buy new clothes and a new car every 3 years. It's better for the planet if I live simply, and I don't really need much. I don't need entertainment. People cannot distinguish between what they need and what they want, especially Americans. Everybody thinks that whatever they want, they need. It's insane.
Yeah, I don't know what the world would look like if everyone had a profound spiritual realization. We might all accidentally burn down our houses because we're leaving the pots on the stoves. But I don't think we have to worry about that anytime soon.
No. Is what we're doing to the earth terrible? Yes. But I'm totally convinced that consciousness changes one person at a time, and consciousness changes very slowly. So I'm not into great big projects. It's like something like your site, where you do podcasts with people that maybe can help other people realize something and get enough satisfactions from just being, that they don't need all this stuff and all this entertainment. That's very helpful and that's useful. But that's, for me, it's like we change one person at a time. I'm not sure big organizations, they get bureaucratic and weighted down. So I think it's just important for everybody to embody, as you say, if you realize this, that to just embody it as best you can, and things will happen. So, but, my experience with big organizations like, the missionaries trying to save the Africans, I just never bought it. It seems really arrogant. So, but that's my personal conditioning. So I'm just not the type to say, hey, everybody, let's put out a neon sign. Maury knows something. You all need to hear this. I'm more quiet. So that's why writing seems very safe to me. So I put my blog out there, and, not too many people find it, but people that do find it are people usually that I respect. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to talk to them. And like now, if you put this up there, if people think I have something that might help them, then I'm glad to talk to them. But I don't have any sense of, you need to know what I know. I mean, it's just all in God's hands, not anyone else's.
Well, I will be sure to link to your blog. And then just by way of wrap up, a couple questions I often like to ask people. Are there any films that you are particularly attracted to in terms of you feel like express some spiritual truths?
That's a hard one for me to answer. The one film that really has always struck me is Casablanca.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know that most people would consider that a spiritual film, but for me, what it is that someone, stood up alone against, up the system, like the Nazis or whatever. Somebody stood up and said, no, this isn't right. I'll tell you what, speaking of film, I'll tell you, I'll brag a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was writing a book a long time ago, I would put chapters up on a site that Francis Ford Coppola has. I don't know if it's still up, I think it is, but it was called Zoetrope. And basically, Francis Ford Coppola was trying to gather writers together and where he would get the first chance to see their short stories. And so he could grab one if he thought he could make a film out of it and he liked it. And so I participated on that site. And at some point, he had thought that writers were all good people and they wouldn't do any shenanigans, but people started misbehaving on the site. So at one point he came on and he told everybody, he said, okay, we're going to have to put a oversight committee on this site, and if people are misbehaving, we'll run it by these people, and if they need to be kicked off or reprimanded, then this board will do it. And he said, I'm going to let everybody select, vote on who you want, but I'm going to put one person on the board. And it was me. And he said it was because I had a really cool head.
Nice story.
And that happened, and it happened to me earlier, I got to Nisargadatta before he was well known at all. When his first book was just barely published, I was on CompuServe in the early days on some forum. Some teacher, I'll give you a couple of examples. Some teacher called or emailed me and said, he said, you're ready for something a little more than this for him. He says, you need to look at this guy, Nisargadatta. And I literally had to order the book. It wasn't Barnes & Noble, didn't even have it. I had to order it from India. And so that's how I got into him. Years before, other people were talking about him and discovered. And then I wrote a review on one of Robert Wolfe's books on Amazon, and he ended up calling me and thanking me, so I got to talk to him.
Well, we're at the hour and a half mark, and if there's any final thoughts that you would like to leave people with, you're more than welcome to.
I would just say that if people want to have some good insight, they should go check out the TAT Foundation online, because you guys have some good stuff.
Well, we appreciate the mention of that. Thank you. And again, Maury, thank you very much. The time flew by, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Good. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. For more information about today's guest, as well as more interviews, books, and other resources, go to spiritualteachers.org. That's spiritualteachers.org.